here's another beginning. Saint Bridget of Sweden, who in Sweden is known as Birgitta. That's what we're going with. Her notable dates are 1303 to 1373. And before she was even born, she'd made a name for herself. So that's pretty unusual in terms of the ladies that I've spoken to you about already. So her mother, Ingeborg, was well advanced in her pregnancy with the baby, Birgitta, Bridget. She was actually named after her father, who was a knight, and his name was Birger Persson. I'm so sorry to any Swedes. I really am sorry. Whilst her mother was pregnant, advanced pregnancy, she was miraculously rescued from a shipwreck by the king's brother. And dozens did die in the wreck. However, Ingeborg survived the tragedy. And in a vision that she experienced the following night after being rescued, she saw a person dressed in glowing clothing who informed her that she had been saved because of the good she bore in her womb, a gift given to her from God. Some months after this, on the night the baby was born, an elderly priest within the local parish also experienced a vision in which Mary appeared to him with a book in her hands, informing him that a girl had been born, and this is the direct quote, whose voice will be heard throughout the world with admiration. So, despite these beginnings, like pretty auspicious, as a girl, she didn't immediately show signs of the mysticism that would eventually lead to her becoming a saint or the canonization. For the first 3 years of her life, she didn't speak at all. Not one, nothing. Her parents, in fact, feared that she was a mute. And finally, when she was almost 4, she began to talk and surprised everybody by not, speaking just basic words, but phrases or, fully articulated sentences, let's put it like that. And by the time she was in her early teens, she desired to lead the life of a holy woman. As she was one of only 2 surviving daughters of a pretty important Swedish family, the religious life was not an option. And despite her reticence, when she was 13, she was married to 18-year-old nobleman Ulf Gudmarsson, potentially. That put her in a bit of a tricky position. In the 14th century, when she lived, the Roman Catholic Church still viewed marriage as an inferior state. So the traditional view, there were 3 stages of womanhood. There was virginity, there was marriage, and there was widowhood. And this traditional view emphasized virginity as the only state in which women could achieve true union with Christ, as well as to be recognized as a saint by the church itself. So her biographer, whose name is also Bridget Morris, says, marriage, which involves sexual activity, was regarded by the church as incompatible with a woman's aspirations to live a godly life of the highest kind. So there were a couple of exceptions, by the way. If the girl had been forced into marriage or the sexual activity against her will, or if her marriage was remained unconsummated, or if she lived with her husband in partial or complete abstinence from any sexual activity. Those were the caveats, like the I can't think of the word. That's what I'm going with. Those were the things that meant it wasn't the case. So she chose the latter, which was to abstain. For at least 1 year after their marriage, both she and her husband lived that way. And then when they did, it was only with the goal of pregnancy in mind. And they prayed diligently for a child, they got their prayer. They got 8 children, all of whom lived beyond infancy, which was rare enough in itself, like in the Middle Ages. So by the time Bridget was canonized, marriage had gained a certain level of acceptability for saints. The church still reserved 4 virgins like the highest state of sanctity. And during the canonization process for one of her contemporaries, which was Catherine of Siena, who we spoke about the other evening, a Dominican advocate for the saint argued that given her unmarried state, Catherine was superior to Bridget. So it was like a widely held belief. Bridget and Ulf were married for 28 years, and it was an affectionate marriage. It's clear from her own writing that Bridget was at least somewhat relieved when her husband died. There's no easy way to say that. When I buried my husband, I buried him with all bodily love, she wrote, and although I loved him with all my heart, I should not wish to buy back his life, not with the least money. Just tell us how you really feel, Bridget. Anyway, with that pronouncement, she discarded the ring and said that it reminded her too much of her earthly ties. And now she was free to pursue the holy life that she'd wanted from the beginning, and the path to sainthood also. So a few days after her husband's passing, she experienced a vision calling her to religious life. And as she prayed in her private chapel, she witnessed a bright cloud, and in this was suspended the likeness of a human being. "Woman, hear me. I am your God who wishes to speak with you," said the voice. "Fear not, for I am the creator of all and not a deceiver. I do not speak to you for your sake, but for the sake of the salvation of others. You shall be my bridge and my channel, and you shall hear and see spiritual things, and my spirit shall remain with you even until your death." Okay, up until then, she had wrestled with, I guess, whether to fulfill her calling as a cloistered monastic, i.e., away from the world, or as a religious figure, who would remain in contact with the secular world. So the specificity of the vision may have given her a greater flexibility to choose a religious life, in which she was very much out in the world. And many of her, those who came before her, they had experienced personal visions in which they were united with Christ. But Bridget's vision was very much a call to action, a command to serve as a conduit, i.e. a bridge and a channel of God's love for others. So this fit well, actually. Like I said before, usually the gifts of the Spirit are enhancing some natural abilities that we already have. Either way, she was already accustomed to showing God's love for others. Earlier in her life, she'd not only she'd helped her husband, she taught him to read and to use the Franciscan little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That's a mouthful. She was also entrusted with the education of the young King Magnus Eriksson of Sweden and his wife Queen Blanca, and she was only 3 years, older than the king himself. She was related to the king through her mother's side of the family, and that connection benefited her life, at least, during her lifetime. In 1346, she founded the Order of the Brigittines after her husband passed, and that order is still around today. King Magnus donated his former castle, I call that a benefit, on the shores of Lake Vättern in Vadstena, Sweden, as a place of residence for the nuns. Bridget didn't enter the convent. She embarked on a different mission. So in 1349, she received a vision that determined the course of the rest of her life. Go to Rome, and you are to stay there in Rome until you see the Supreme Pontiff and the Emperor there at the same time in Rome, and you shall announce my words to them. So she listened to that, and she set out for Rome the same year and never returned to Sweden. So in this time, mystics were deemed oftentimes heretics and satanic messengers. Her visions and subsequent writings were radical, like especially in view of, how mystics were often perceived. The messages her messages were often specifically directed at very influential and powerful men, and they often held within them like dire warnings of outcomes if they didn't change their ways. If they didn't take note of God's commands. So in book 4 of her Revelations, her book, Bridget attacked the corrupt and decayed moral state of Rome. She compared Rome to a meadow overgrown with thistles, desperately in need of a thorough weeding with a sharp iron, a cleansing with fire, and ploughing by a pair of oxen. She described, I'm just reading this now. She described the shocking, immoral behaviour of the canons, the priests, the deacons, whom she called the devil's whoremongers, for abandoning clerical dress and customs and living in sin with mistresses in their own homes, while still conducting daily masses. Go on, Bridget. She compared the nunneries to brothels. She accused monks of failing to follow their own rules, and she criticised lay people for practising such rampant polygamy that wives and mistresses were giving birth at the same time in the same house. She attributed the demise of the church and society to the fact that the Pope had abandoned Rome to live in Avignon in France, and that was mentioned when we discussed Catherine of Siena. Don't be surprised, my lord, that I call Rome unfortunate, she wrote in Revelations. The Catholic faith may soon go under. Some of the priesthood still love God, but the Pope not being there, they feel fatherless. So we see from this, she didn't really hold back at all on what she thought. And these criticisms were courageous, just like at the very least. They were extremely brave, especially now she was a widow. So she wasn't, she received, what's the word? Like attacks on her personal character. She was accused of heresy. And it's said that as she walked down a narrow alleyway in Rome, a nobleman whom she'd had a go at a few days earlier intentionally dumped the water from his wash basin, dirty water, out the window and onto her head. So she did have friends in Rome. However, she was generally viewed with either hatred, suspicion, distaste. She was constantly threatened with being imprisoned, also by burning at the stake. Yeah, they weren't best pleased. Probably she was spared the death sentence because her criticisms were directed at individual popes and the state of Rome, as opposed to the institution of the Roman Catholic Church. So she was determined to succeed in her calling, and she got her wish temporarily. Pope Urban V, returned to Rome in 1368 and paraded into the city at the side of Emperor Charles IV. However, by 1370, Urban had retreated to Montefiascone, maybe. That's what it looks like. And then Bridget was given direct permission to appeal to him in person. So she failed, ostensibly, to persuade him to return. So, again, in book 4 of Revelations, she she detailed the vision that she received from the Virgin Mary, noting that if the Pope returned to Avignon, he would receive a blow or a puff of wind so that his teeth will gnash or be knocked out, his sight will become dim and dark, and his limbs will tremble. And when Pope Urban went down, as it were, with sudden illness and died in Avignon, like days after his return, they deemed that her prophecy was fulfilled. She didn't become less determined to see the papacy restored in Rome for the rest of her life. 5 days before she died in 1373, she appealed to Pope Gregory XI for the last time, despite the fact that she'd been told by God in a vision that she would not live to see the Pope's return to Rome. If Gregory asks for signs, give him 3, she wrote to her confessor, who was the priest Alfonso Pecha. That God has spoken wonderful words through a woman. To what purpose is not for the salvation of souls and their bettering. It is my will that he come now, this fall, and that he comes to stay. Nothing is dearer to me than this, that he come to Italy. So, it would be fair, I guess, to say that ultimately she failed, if that makes sense, in the calling that she was given, in the mission. She dedicated the vast majority of her not short life to restoring the papacy to Rome. She didn't live to see that happen. She also founded, her monastic order, and yet was never a true member of the order like herself. She didn't ever return to Sweden to see the results of her vision either. However, as in terms of extraordinarily courageous and not revolutionary, that's not the word I want, remarkable, that's certainly notable, and her seemingly unique capacity that she had during her life to get people talking, certainly, not only in the a prophecy or prophetic visionary role that she had, but also similar to Catherine, a marked and unusual political and societal emissary, an ambassador, I guess, for God. She didn't mince her words one bit. She just criticized wherever she saw moral decline. She was right there with a couple of tongue lashings ready to go. And this was at the risk to herself of death, excommunication, e.g. in her mind that would have been hell, ostracism, hate, all of these ad hominem attacks and stuff. More importantly, more exemplary is that she never wavered at all. Even her, I won't say unfortunate marriage, but the one that she didn't really want in and the one that she wasn't absolutely devastated when it came to a natural conclusion, even throughout that, when it must have seemed, at least in her early marriage, oh my gosh, what have I done here? Because what she genuinely wanted, even from a young child, didn't seem possible then, but God made a way. Obviously, he always does. And she never wavered in her faith anyway, or her trust in God. And even though, in terms of the Pope being back in Rome, etc., after 30 years of her considerable effort, regardless of that, she persevered, in her obedience. Gregory XI, as a side note, eventually did make a re-entry into Rome, and that was January 17th, 1377, which was 4 years after she passed away. So she didn't see it, but she never doubted that, God had said so. So she never doubted that it would happen. Yeah, so she can serve as a reminder even that, if God tells you something's going to happen, it's going to happen. Whether you can, I mean, I don't want to like talk about, it might happen after you die, because that's not really what I'm getting at. But the thing is, just because you don't see it happening doesn't mean that God isn't still working on that very thing. So, like, it's a reason to take courage, cheer up. I feel like that's in one of the translations. Jesus saying it, I love that. Yeah, if you're outside of the promises, then what you doing? Get back in again. Like, it's a bit odd.